The Dentalpreneur Podcast. Okay, doctor, it's time to put down that handpiece. You're listening to the show dedicated to helping dentists get their lives back. It's time to decrease your stress, increase your profitability, and regain your passion. Now introducing your host, Dr. Mark Costas.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Dentalpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Costas. How are you guys out there today? I hope you're doing fantastic on this beautiful fall afternoon. The leaves are starting to threaten to change colors a little bit here in Prescott, Arizona. The mornings are cool, and I love me some cool weather during football season. So I'm super excited to welcome our guest today, who has a very, very interesting bio and has a very interesting niche in a larger profession that we're going to speak to her about today. Today, we want to welcome Carol Bowser to the podcast. Carol Bowser, JD, is a workplace conflict expert. After practicing employment law for several years, Carol founded Conflict Management Strategies when she realized a lawsuit can't deliver the level of resolution and satisfaction that is gained when people are actively involved in creating solutions to their workplace conflict. Carol's clients come with a wide range of employers because conflict is universal across all industries and types of organizations. Where there are people, there is conflict. The key is to help people recognize and address conflict before it damages working relationships and creates organizational drag. In her over 20 years of experience, she has discovered some universal themes about workplace conflict and loves to share how people at all levels can strengthen their conflict resolution muscles. Welcome to the podcast, Carol. How are you doing today?
I am doing fabulous. It is fall in the Pacific Northwest, where I am, I'm creating hopefully a conflict-free zone up here. But to your point of fall came in like wicked fast this year. We went from 80 degrees up here in Tacoma to huge amounts of rainfall, and now it is cool again, but clear. And it is definitely, dare I say it, sweater weather.
Sweater weather. It is sweater weather. Do you guys get snow in Tacoma?
We do periodically, and it kind of shuts absolutely everything down because unlike, Prescott, Arizona, where you are, right, everything's kind of flat and on a grid. It's hilly up here, and we get it periodically, and it creates snow days, which means that you don't necessarily have to leave the house.
Yeah, I grew up in Southern California and Arizona, and then moved to the Midwest to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for dental school. And it's funny. When we get a dusting here in Arizona, we get a fair amount of snow in Prescott, but we're far less capable of handling it. And we get snow days for what they would laugh at in Milwaukee. Like, they charge through any type of weather in the Midwest, and they don't shut anything down for anything. Not even, 48 inches of snow in a day. They'll continue to march on. But I do think it's funny how certain states and certain communities handle snow not very well. So, hey, listen, this is a very interesting line of work that you've chosen to go into. So, employment law. First of all, let's talk about your history. So, what got you interested in law to begin with? And then how did you end up specializing in this branch of law?
So, like, I think anything, there's usually some type of personal catalyst moment. And for mine, I was fairly young, and I had an employer, and I'd asked myself, had I known what my rights and responsibilities, in retrospect, would I have made the same decisions? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. But as a newer employee, I was just woefully unaware about what the rights, but also the corresponding responsibilities were of the employer. And I thought, well, gosh, where do you go to learn about rights and responsibilities? Well, you go to law school. And also, I come from a family where there are lawyers. And I think lawyers, like doctors and dentists and CPAs or mechanics, it's a profession that you're somewhat familiar with. Mm-hmm. So I ended up deciding, I'm going to learn about rights and responsibilities. But at the same time, there was this kind of movement for a little bit of kind of court reform where they wanted more things to go to mediation before clogging up the court system. So the concept of mediation, where the parties sit down with a trained mediator and try to problem solve and negotiate a settlement. That was kind of top of my mind too at that point. Because I thought, I want to be an active participant, because I was an active participant in my life that kind of created this disappointment. And I want to be able to be that person where people can, actively participate in telling their story and hopefully reaching some level of resolution to the problem. And that's kind of where I went. And then I went to law school, and my focus was always on the employment relationship. And so I just kind of focused on that. And at the same point in time, I started taking mediation training. I started volunteering to mediate small claims court cases, other types of things, to be able to get those conflict resolution mediation muscles developed. Because it's like any other skill set, you have to be able to practice it, and be able to practice it in a way that you start getting competency, and then you get, a higher level of proficiency, and then hopefully you kind of know what you're doing. And so I practiced employment law for several years. I was a contract mediator for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for several years. And then, after a while, and after, a substantial amount of law school debt, it was, I wasn't particularly happy about doing it. It wasn't a good alignment of knowledge, skills, talent, interest, lifestyle. And then I went back to, what is it that I really wanted to do? So slowly, what became conflict management strategies started taking form.
Awesome. So how long has conflict management strategies been in?
The company since over 20 years now, I want to say.
Wow.
I've been doing that. I've been doing this under the banner of conflict management strategies versus just Carol Bowser.
Yeah.
Mediator, trainer, conflict resolution person. For a while, I want to say, I think I incorporated in 2006. So almost 20 years for the name of this company, and incorporated and started doing what eventually became the company shortly before that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your origin story. Very interesting. So, I've been both. I've been an employer and I've been an employee. And I do think that, from an employee's perspective, there is definitive things that bother you and you feel unjust about the way that things work in a particular company that you happen to work in, maybe. And then, when you switch sides and you become an employer, you see things from a completely different perspective. And then additionally, everybody has different temperatures, right? So some people are more easily offended, and there's certain things that they refuse to concede as far as, the working environment. And then there's other people that really aren't bothered by much. So I can see that this would be a very challenging kind of position to be in, where you're trying to resolve conflict amongst two different sides that have much different perspectives. So what is the starting point when you have people that are so far apart? And, obviously everybody has their perspective and their opinion about, what is just and what is not just. So what do you do? What do you do in a situation like that, where people are coming from two completely different polar opposite sides?
Well, so one of the things is, I don't try to argue with someone that their point is right, because and I'm going to make a subtle distinction here. They are honestly sharing what they think and feel, and what they think the employment relationship should be. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, they are sharing what they think and feel, and describing what they think their employment relationship should be. And I recognize that in all employment situations, there are power dynamics going on. So I find that people maybe aren't really articulate in what they're wanting. So I always ask, whatever side it is. And this was a mediator tool that I used all the time at the EOC. And when I'm training people on how to handle workplace conflict, I always say that one common element is unmet expectations. So I talk to people and I say, tell me, how did you expect, the practice manager to handle this? How did you expect the front office staff to handle this? How did you expect, the dentist to be able to handle this? And ask both people and hopefully get them to be thoughtful about it and then start pulling it apart. But until you can kind of find out what their expectation was, then you're just really having them retell their narrative over and over and over again. And the more they retell their narrative, the more they buy into it. But reframing it in terms of, what were your expectations? And then we can start talking about, is that expectation realistic given the parameters of the practice? Is that expectation realistic? Is it unfortunate that this happened, or is it just something maybe that we're just going to have to live with? And sometimes I will say that, fortunately or unfortunately, sometimes I'm just there to kind of facilitate a breakup, more of a deliberate breakup. And if someone, is saying this is what I need to be happy working here, and the practice manager and the owner say that's not something we can provide, then you can kind of look at each other and say, okay, so if this isn't going to work, then sometimes it's just being able to articulate what the exit strategy is at that point in time.
Gotcha. Okay, so you say where there are people, there is conflict, and I couldn't agree more. At one point, I had almost 120 employees, and there seemed to be some sort of fire that I was putting out every single day as the primary employer of this large group. How do we prevent as much as possible this conflict that is bound to arise, and to minimize it quickly if it does arise?
So a couple of different things. I think talking about, setting expectations for third. Every employer is going to say, talk to that person directly. But the vast majority of people aren't going to talk to that person directly, or then it becomes kind of fighting over who's right, who's more right, who's has a better interpretation of things. And being able to talk, with and train the direct managers of, I say, eyes up, ears up, head on a swivel. Because I'm thinking if you had 120 people and people are constantly coming to you, you can't do your job. If you're doing the manager's job or the supervisor's job or the treatment manager's job or the front desk manager's job, that not every conflict should rise to your level. So then, how is it that you're training each one of those department heads or leads to be able to know their people and recognize? Now, I have listened to a couple of your podcasts, and one that happened not too terribly long ago, where you were going through and talking with some of like the questions that were asked on I think the Dental Success Institute's page, and you were picking up things, and the woman who was there talking to you was talking about people's love language, how to be able to get connect with people. I would say you need to learn the staff's conflict language. I mean, is there conflict language to like kind of blame and shame and call out people? Is there conflict language to confront people? Is there conflict language to talk to others and vent to others? Is there conflict language more to hint around it and not get directly involved? So, what are those things of, how well do you know your people? And maybe even during the hiring process or teaming process, or, kind of the time that happens before they get the day started, of just being able to say, hey, let's talk a little bit. When things don't go right for you, how do you normally respond to that? And people will say, oh, I just really shut up and I don't really do anything, or I go home and I think about it for 24 hours and then I come back. So being able to find out what their conflict language is and recognize it. And then also, I think people need to be trained at every single level and in practices. together, being trained together. So that way people are getting the same set of skills. So that way, when we have conflict or we do need to do stuff on the fly, we're recognizing that people are using those particular skills in an attempt to problem solve, to build collaboration, and that are in the best interest of the practice.
I like that. Conflict language. Love languages and languages of appreciation was a worldwide sensation. I think you're onto something. I think you need to write that book.
Mm-hmm.
What's your conflict language?
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
I know. I might just, and I will say, I really appreciated the fact that she used the love language, but he did a second one for, what are your languages of appreciation at work?
Yeah.
And one of his, speaking as a former lawyer is like, they say like physical contact and touch. He said, don't do that at work. Don't do that. Don't do that at work.
Yes, I agree 100%. And I did follow that one universal law. So, okay, so we have disagreements. We're going to have conflict. There's human beings in the workplace. So when does that turn from a disagreement and maybe just something that can be resolved or something that could simmer for a period of time into, all right, I'm calling a lawyer now. I'm calling a conflict or employment lawyer now from either side. So what is that threshold? Like, what is that line in the sand that somebody's just stepped over it and an employment lawyer would say, yeah, it's time to lawyer up both sides?
So I'm going to take that in a couple of different parts. The first is, and this goes to when I was practicing employment law, but then also when I was a mediator for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, I would say it was a fairly universal theme that employees would file charges when they didn't feel heard, when they felt nothing was getting done at all, that they were just being given lip service to something that they felt deeply about. And I will go to this. I think most employees, when they bring forward concerns in some way, shape, or form, they feel as though a person, a system, or a process is impeding them from feeling fully successful at work.
Okay.
Let me say that again, that if they're not feeling fully successful at work, and they may gripe about and maybe these gripes are completely legitimate about like a system or a process or a piece of equipment that's just not working the way it was hoped to work. However, most people will say it's that person, if that person would just get out of the way. Mm-hmm. And the other thing on the employee side, that if there are performance issues that need to be addressed, that isn't for public consumption. Those are confidential conversations. And most people will say, well, hey, if my boss came to me and said you should be doing something different, that, well, I would change. Well, people don't flip on a switch that much. And if we don't see them changing or we see them repeating the behavior, most employees will say, look, owners, managers, they did nothing. They did nothing. And the owners and the managers, and the practice managers could have been having these conversations, but there isn't a substantial enough change in behavior to suit the people who are feeling impeded. So then and we can't tell them, you know what, we've had conversations with them. We've took them on performance improvement plan. We've asked them to go and take communications training. You're not going to make that, well known. So it's deeply unsatisfying. And if people feel as though that the conduct, they're perceiving it as unfair. So this is a longer answer for when do employees lawyer up. Most employees and most people I have found equate unfair, I feel this personally unfair, as illegal. My definition of unfair is likely different than the organization's definition of unfair, because organizations and practices, their definition of fairness is how can we apply this policy consistently to everyone. And the law's definition of unfair is they're saying, are some people being impeded based on illegal criteria from being successful in the workplace? So that when you start hearing it's not fair, it's an issue of fairness, and they're not feeling heard, and you get an inkling that they are equating personally unfair, meaning I would have made a different decision if I was running that practice, that's when there might be attorneys involved. From the employer's point of view, I am hoping that in as much as there is business counsel out there for everyone, I am also hoping that they have an employment counsel, because business counsel is an area of expertise. Employment counsel is a different area of expertise, and there should be one of the employment counsel as well. Because if it's like we're hearing rumblings, we're looking at taking this course of action, and the employment counsel can say, just in consulting, people saying, well, hey, tell me a bit about this person, tell me a bit about what your policy was. Did you follow the policy? Did you have documentation? Are you concerned that they're going to make some type of disruption to the practice? And are they, making or allegations or things like, well, this is because of my race or my gender or my ethnicity, or that you're doing this because I brought forward concerns about ethical concerns or the treatment of patients. That's waving flags up that they're thinking about filing some type of complaint that can have legal consequences to the practice. And I think that's when they start luring up. My thing is like, well, let's take it like 47 yards back and saying, what were you noticing before about behavior? Is there a shared understanding of what respect looks like in the practice? And does everybody have a shared understanding of what that looks like in practice, not just for the practice, but in practice, that this is okay? And I think that those are the types of things that if people start talking about trust and respect and feeling heard and fairness, ding, 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 they are looking for attention to get some type of perceived slight or problem fixed.
Could you give us some examples of illegal criteria as you stated? What are we looking at as far as I'm getting kind of the red flags and some the warning signs if somebody is feeling as though they're slighted or they might feel things are unfair, but what constitutes illegal criteria just in general?
So the federal anti-discrimination law, race, gender, ethnicity, religion, pregnancy, all the ones that you normally think about, that if they're and depending on your state, it may be sexual identity, sexual orientation. It might be that if you have someone who is in the reserves and taking leave to be able to serve, and there's concerns and griping about, well, they're not really here, and we may make decisions based on veteran status. Those are the types of things that should really get attention. And also, if you hear the words harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, that is a big, whoa, slow down, tell me what's happening here. Because if you've been in the workplace for any point in time, and people know that those words will automatically focus attention on the issue. However, when someone says I'm being harassed or something like that, there's your personal definition of it, and then there is the legal definition of it. And I think people cross those over inappropriately sometimes, most of the time, actually.
Got it. Okay. What then if a good portion of these cases are able to be kind of resolved during mediation? When does something evolve from mediation into a full-blown lawsuit?
Well, so a couple of different things that there's, I want to distinguish that there is mediation that happens once people have involved lawyers and started making demands for settlement. Okay. And that is on the legal track. Most lawsuits do go through some type of mediation before they reach trial. There's also kind of informal mediation where someone might have filed a charge with a human rights organization or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it is gone before going in through a deep investigation that the federal agency does. They offer people the opportunity, hey, do you want to sit down together with a mediator and try to resolve this before there's any finding or significant investigation? Then what I do is I say there are plenty of lawyers who are interested in doing that after there's damage has really been done. I want to come in a little bit earlier and say maybe you've got a practice manager and maybe someone, within the front desk who are just kind of at odds, or maybe you have a couple of people who are, work in the front desk who are just rubbing each other the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And it's just creating this kind of, icky, non-productive environment among the front desk. And then, if you got a problem with the front desk, then we've got that front of the house, back of the house type of dynamic that are going on, and that it leaks out. Mm-hmm. So what I decided to do was focus on the issues that aren't necessarily illegal, but are causing damage. And that we're losing people are losing sleep over it, or it's just causing what I call organizational drag. Mm-hmm. And if you look at your numbers, you may look and see, do you have high turnover? Are people spending a lot of time trying to deal with interpersonal issues versus doing the job and driving the revenue that they were hired to do? And that's the kind of area that I like to work in.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, so let's take a typical dental office, for instance here. Okay, so let's say that somebody falls under one of the categories, right? They are they're of a certain ethnicity or gender, or they're pregnant, and there is a true issue with either culture where they aren't getting along with the people in the office, or they're creating toxicity in the workplace. Or mm-hmm. there's a performance issue where they're just literally not living up to the standards of the organization. However, they fall into one of these protected categories. What can an employer do to make sure that if they are reprimanded or fired for a good reason, like not a good culture fit or lack of effective performance, that the employer is not on the hook for an illegal criteria or getting rid of them for an illegal reason?
Yeah. So generally speaking, again, I'm not giving any legal advice to anyone. So even though I'm a card-carrying member, I decided not to kind of stop actively practicing. But this is still the world that I live in. Uh-huh. So it's along the lines of any best practices for managing. I mean, are people noticing? Are there informal conversations first? Have you been documenting it? And if you can say, look, this is our standard of performance here, and you're not meeting the standard of performance, and we've given you, training, we've given you coaching, we've tried to bring in resources for you, but you're just simply not meeting what the criteria is, and we need to have a parting of the ways. And I will say that if someone is that unsatisfied at work, they may not want to be there either. Mm-hmm. And I think I have many different opinions about this, that I think we try to give people, an opportunity to improve. We give them tools to be able to improve. We give them guidance. We give them, some type of accountability to be able to improve. And sometimes we have to be able to give the gift of saying, this just isn't working out. And I think many small practices in particular, if you have to ask someone to leave, it is painful. It is very painful, because maybe you really like them as a person, say a little bit different than the example you gave, but maybe you like them as a person, but they are just not performing the job. Mm-hmm. That can be difficult. Or maybe you have a really, really long-term employee, but the practice has changed, the position has changed, and they're not meeting what the current needs are. And then also just being able to say and document, because I know that the listeners hear that they understand the business, they understand the data, they understand the metrics. And if you're able to track the metrics and say, look, this is what we're expecting, this is not what you're doing, and you are not being held to a standard different from anyone else. Mm-hmm.
And I would say vice versa, right? If somebody was a top performer, they're great clinically, or they were exceptional at mm-hmm. The performance metrics for their position, but they were just causing hostility or a cultural mismatch within the organization, you would have to do the same thing. You'd have to document as much as possible, offer the ability for some sort of corrective action, and then you're going to have to do what you have to do.
Exactly. And I think that might even be harder because I've seen a lot where top performers are across industries are allowed to get away with more, because if we're looking only at the numbers, that's one thing. But a culture is both objective things and subjective. How are people experiencing? Are we living our values? And I will say sometimes it can be very difficult if we say we want, a collaborative team building, positive work environment, but we're also really, really emphasizing performance in the numbers. And if somebody feels as though they are being held back and they get irritated and they get frustrated, or maybe they feel as though there's too much pressure on them to attain those numbers and they're lashing out at people, that's not good either. So being able to be very clear of we want both objective and subjective, and on either end of the scale, if you're not willing to let us know if you have troubles, that's not fair to us, because if you value harmony, you may inadvertently be encouraging silence. But by the same time, if you're encouraging production, then we're saying, there's a balancing act. We want to be direct. But we can be direct and we can be kind and we can be respectful at the same point in time. And again, what I find is sometimes that we point at a person is a problem, but it might be a system. It might be a process. It might be miscommunication going through. It might be that we have the exact same values, but what behavior we believe exemplifies those values might be very different.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So let's say that an employer is found guilty or at fault. I don't even know what you would call it. And maybe a judgment against him. I don't know the correct legal term in this case, but what if that happens? How are damages calculated? Is that just completely subjective? Depending.
I'm going to give you a great lawyer answer. It depends.
Okay. Yeah.
But usually, just generally speaking, it depends on, if it's a state or federal statute or if it's a municipal statute. Usually it is some version of like what the wages are, what the lost wages are, or what like the emotional pain and suffering would have been. And so it all just kind of depends. However, all of that cash flow out, that doesn't even include attorney's fees as well. And in a lot of these cases where harassment discrimination, the party is also, aside for compensation for lost wages, pain and suffering, they're also entitled to attorney's fees as well. So, look at all of the opportunities there that you had to, in your retreats, bring in training for conflict resolution, bring in training for how to be able to give and receive feedback. Talk about how sometimes we can be direct, and that's supporting the practice's values, and also it's helping have a more efficient business. So let's get away from just some of the technical things and maybe some of the skills in providing the patient care, but then also some of the skills in what you're looking for to exemplify the values. And also, if you have people who are newer to the workforce, you need to train them on how to be an employee, not just an employee for you, but an employee period. And so talking about that idea of what are the mutual expectations that you should have of each other, and how you would like and how they would like to bring forward if they have concerns or they don't feel as though they're being impeded in some way in their success as an employee.
I love it. So are there some resources you could recommend to insulate an employer or to encourage a healthier workplace if we just don't know what the rules are as far as harassment or, some other thing that could be claimed against us? How do we insulate ourselves from those types of things? I know there's a level of common sense, but that's not, to me, that's not enough to count on.
I would say do not count on common sense. The law wasn't based on your personal situation for common sense. The law is trying to provide remove barriers for people to work. Mm-hmm. So again, if you want to be able to go to sources like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, maybe there's a guide for employers there, but also, start talking, to an employment counsel. But I will tell you is, do you have a handbook that talks about these things? Mm-hmm. Do you have a handbook that talks about what the process for bringing forward concerns is? That's one of the very, very first lines of defense is a well-written handbook, and also providing training for people, training about harassment and discrimination. Mm-hmm. But even that, I still believe people need communications and team building and collaboration training, because you may know what you're supposed to do, but if your conflict language is just really preventing you from doing it, are we training people on how to have these conversations? My guess is that there may be some resources from your insurance provider. I'd be willing to bet that there are, aside from malpractice, there's other types of, employment insurance. And chances are that your insurance provider, who would be called upon to defend you in these things, probably has resources for you, including maybe trainings or webinars, so that way you're more informed. And just think about how you want to cascade that information down in a way that is consistent with the values and the processes of the practice.
Carol, does conflict management strategies, are you a law firm, or are you a counselor, or what do you guys provide to employers and employees?
Well, thanks for asking. So, although I am a card-carrying member of the Washington State Bar Association, I'm no longer actively practicing law. Mm-hmm. And so where I focus on is training and coaching and speaking and facilitating. So sometimes the facilitating is we're doing great things, and sometimes the facilitation in and among the groups and the teams is we've got issues and we need help working through them to create a solution together.
Got it. Okay, that's a great segue into asking you if you could share your contact information if anybody's interested in retaining your services. And do you work regionally, nationally?
I do work nationally, thanks to some of this COVID and things like that. I am able, and now that the airplanes are flying again, have conflict, will travel, and also through the virtual world, that as an opportunity. So first and foremost, people can connect with me on LinkedIn, where not too terribly long ago, someone identified me as one of the top 30 people on LinkedIn to follow for conflict resolution.
Awesome.
And also, you can look at my website, managingconflict.com, and there's a way to get a hold of me directly through there. Also, if people are interested, they can sign up for my conflict tip of the day, a tip, a trick, a technique, all designed to help people increase their conflict resolution muscles. So that way they've got a daily resource to be able to think about. And then also I find a lot of people end up sharing it with others within their team and office. And it's a safe and easy way to start talking about conversations about culture and how we approach conflict, or we don't approach conflict, or how and when we show appreciation, or how and when we might annoy each other.
Awesome. Well, Carol, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. I learned a lot. There's a lot of big words that you threw around, and I didn't know the correct words even to ask you the appropriate questions, but I appreciate your patience and talking us through kind of some of the set of obstacles within the workforce that both sides have to be aware of. So it was very, very, very educational. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I wish everyone, hopefully, a conflict-free day.
I love it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Carol Bowser.